What's up guys, and welcome back. Today we're going to be doing another book review from Stephen King. You might have been wondering where I've been with these reviews for the last, it's probably been a year at least since I've done a Stephen King review. And the reason for that is because of the one I've been reading is The Stand. Now if you know about The Stand, you'll know it's like extremely long. It's over 1,300 pages in this edition, almost 1,400. So it literally took me about 10 months to read this, and I finally got it done, and I'm glad I did. So this was originally written by Stephen King in 1978. This version here is actually the uncut one, which he released in 1990, which has some stuff that he took out in the editing process, or people asked him to take out, and he's restored it to most of its original glory, I guess. So this is the full uncut edition that I am reviewing. Some of the changes with this edition are mostly about the characters, like little bits like character story arcs, but the time period has actually changed depending on which version you've read. I'm not really sure what the dates are in the original one, but the dates for this one is that it's set in the 90s, obviously being written in 78. It's more of a future of 1990 seen from the eyes of someone in 1978. A little bit of trivia: before this book was actually released, there was a short story that King wrote years and years ago which made it into the Night Shift collection, which I've done a review on already. It's called Night Surf, and it's actually a prelude into the story The Stand. It's in the same universe. So the premise of The Stand is that the military accidentally release an airborne strain of flu, which is very fast spreading, and people die in these really grotesque ways where it gets inside their lungs and they just blow up and they die. And because it's so fast, it spreads over the entire of the world. From the perspective of the characters in the book, it only seems like it goes as far as the United States, but obviously with how fast it spreads, you'd imagine the whole world had actually been affected by it. And what it does is it leaves 99% of the population of the world, let's say, dead. And the only people who are alive are the ones who are immune to it. And like I said, you see this through a lot of characters' perspective, and each of these perspectives take place in a different part of the United States. So the whole story takes place in the United States basically. We follow a variety of characters throughout this book from all walks of life in different parts of the country, and I've got to say the characters are definitely the most interesting part about this story. Now I could easily say that this book could be split into 3 different books, not because of the length, just because of the way that it's situated. There's like one where it's about the breakdown of society after the flu has escaped. Then there's the one where people are dealing with the aftermath of basically the whole population of the earth dying off. And then the third book I would say is The Stand, where they stand back up on their feet and try and build themselves back up and build the world back to how it was, or at least in a different way. I'd say there was 2 main protagonists in this, whereas there's so many characters, but I'd say that the 2 that fill the leader role in this is Larry Underwood and Stu Redman. Stu Redman is a Texan, just the everyday guy, nice guy, with a bit of a strong touch to him, and Larry Underwood is actually a musician who's just become world famous just at the same time that this whole thing has happened. So he also has a bit of an issue with drugs and stuff like that. So he's a very interesting character, being on the brink of success and then it's happening and having to deal with just all of this at probably one of his highest and lowest points in his life. If you are a fan of things like Fallout or The Walking Dead, this book must have been such a huge inspiration for that, because I could read it all over those shows when I was reading this book. So many things seem to have been taken from this book, some things almost like identically. The fingerprints of all these shows like The Walking Dead and games like Fallout and post-apocalyptic things, they're just all over this book, and I saw so many references which made me appreciate the book so much more after reading it, because I just know how it started this whole post-apocalyptic wave of things which we're seeing pretty much all the time now. Now the story isn't just about people trying to survive in this new wasteland. There's also a plot line going on where there's these 2 factions starting up in different parts of the country, one in Vegas and I believe one's in Nebraska. And what's interesting about this is one of them seems to be a supernatural entity, I guess, who doesn't seem to be the most pleasant of people, and people are having nightmares about this guy all over the world. People having the same nightmare about this same guy. So a lot of people do not want to stray to his side of the faction, whereas on the other side we have this old lady called Mother Abigail, who is over 100 years old, and everyone's having dreams about her too. So these people are being torn between which side of the country they want to go to, because everyone's having them, and it's like a sort of destiny theme, which is a lot of the story focuses on like whether it's destiny or whether they can make their own choices and make a stand. This is really cool as well because we get to see two parts of the country with completely different types of people, and I always loved it when it went to the Vegas side, which is where the bad faction is. And it's led by a man named Randall Flagg. If you've read any of Stephen King's books, you probably would have heard that name at least once. I won't go into spoilers about where else he shows up in the Stephen King multiverse. Well, he was such a great character and such like an original character for the time as well. And every time we went to him in Vegas, which isn't actually that much of the book, it focuses more on the other sides, but when we do go to the Randall Flagg sides of the story, I was loving it because we got like much more of a horror vibe going on, which we didn't see throughout most of this book, because most people expect Stephen King to be a full-on horror like It or Salem's Lot, The Shining, but mostly this is like a human story with like the dashes of horror every now and again when we do see Randall Flagg and what he's capable of. With there being sort of three sides of this story, with the breakdown, the aftermath, and the standing back up, I can't really think of which is my favourite. Probably the breakdown, actually, because just imagine all these different characters having to go throughout this world where people have just died almost instantly. Like the time period when people die could be hours to days, and it's not pleasant either. People die in like a really slow, horrible way once they have the infection, and getting to see this throughout the whole country in different ways. And one of the greatest things about this book is how Stephen King has just left no stone unturned when it comes to the way everything would react to something of this scale. Like you get to see like the schools and what the military, the law enforcement, hospitals, just everything. You get to see every little detail, and it all builds up to this world of seeing what would have happened. And another thing that I thought was really interesting about this is when you see a lot of post-apocalyptic stories, is that people are scavenging for food, and they're basically living off scraps and trying to find their way around the country and find their way to safe havens. Whereas in this book, it's kind of the opposite. It's like everyone has died and all of their stuff is just laying around. No one's had time to loot shops really. No one's eating all the food, so they have the whole country of shops. It's like consumerism to the max. The characters can just walk into like a supermarket and just load up everything they can. If they need a new car, they can just hotwire a car, or a lot of people will just leave the keys in the car because they've died. So it's really weird to see that from things we've seen in like the last 20 years. It's always the opposite way around, but when going back to this, it's the complete opposite, and it's kind of fun in a way. The way that the whole world is being wiped out, it's quite exciting in the worst way possible. You'd imagine like this is the worst thing to ever happen, but it would be quite fun to live in this world because you can just do what you want, and nothing's really holding you back, and you have all these resources. You could start the world again for fresh, really, and it wouldn't be actually that much of a problem. But obviously the problem is that not everyone who's alive is a good person, and they have no law enforcement or control, so people can do what they want. So that becomes another huge aspect in the book, that there's a lot of power struggle between certain people, and they always run into a lot of vandals and criminals and rapists and horrible things along the road to safety. I gotta be honest, this book can be a slow burn at time. It took me 10 months to read it, and it's because a lot of the chapters are to do with people just on their own trying to find their way across the country, and they only have their own thoughts, and he drags out every little detail about how they can get to A to B really. And while it is slow, it's actually really impactful, because when people have gone through all this stuff and every little detail, it makes it so much worthwhile when they actually get to where they want to go, or when they come to a conclusion to the plot that they're going through. For an example, there's someone who is injured and they're trying to find a car to get to safety to like heal himself up, and normally in something like this they'd want to speed it up. They just find a car and get there, or they don't and they die. And in this particular chapter, they must try about 6 or 7 cars, and there's pages of them walking down highways trying to find cars because they're bleeding out and dying. So when they actually find the car that works, or whatever the solution is, it's so much more satisfying because you've had this build up, and for you as a reader, you're feeling that time is running out for this person. And you don't really get that much in novels, because they usually cut to the chase to save a bit of time on paper, really. There are all different varieties of characters in this story, and some of them are just so memorable as well, especially people like Tom Cullen, who spells everything M-O-O-N, so every time he wants to say a word he just says M-O-O-N. He's a really funny character, and he's also combined with another guy called Nick Andros who is deaf. So him trying to communicate with that guy leads for a lot of like humorous situations. One of the standout characters in this story I would say is the character of Harold Lauder. Now he is a young guy who a lot of people would probably put him into the specification of like an incel in this day and age, and he's such an interesting character because he's just a character study. You want to read more about him and what's going on in his head, because the thoughts he has, we get to see all of his inner thoughts, but no one else really gets to. So you see the perspective of this guy. A lot of people do find him weird, and he does creep them out, but no one really knows the full extent of like madness and things that are going on in his head. Another interesting character in this story is Lloyd Henreid. He, out of his own decision, becomes like the right-hand man of Randall Flagg, and being in that position, it means you have to do whatever Randall Flagg does, and we get to see this interesting plot play out between him and all the people in his faction about whether they're actually doing it because they want to, or they're doing all the decisions out of fear. There's just so many good characters in this book, and they're so fleshed out with it being such a long book that me reading it over 10 months, I felt like I was living the life of these characters, because I think the book takes place over 7 months and I read it over 10 months. So I was basically living out the length of the character's journey in this story, so I really connected with that. I am reviewing this mostly off the top of my head. I have like one small page of notes because I did finish it like a month ago, so I've been trying to collect my thoughts and just remember all the things that happen in the book. So overall, I did really enjoy the book. A lot of people say this is his best book. I will say the ending, like a lot of Stephen King's endings, are known to be not as great as the rest of the book. I will admit that some of the conclusions of the plot lines in the story didn't really lead up to such a satisfying conclusion, but overall it is the journey, and the journey in this book is so long and entertaining that it still doesn't knock the book down, in my opinion. It was a great book, and I'm glad I've read one of his hugest novels now, so some of the ones I'll be reading next will be a lot quicker to read. This thing is absolutely huge, by the way, so that's why it took me so long to read it as well, because every time I'd want to go to somewhere and read it on the train or go outdoors, I'd have to weigh my bag down with this, and it was heavy. So that is probably another reason why it took me so long to read. But the times where I was really getting into it, I was reading like for hours at a night, because I was just really enjoying like the character stories in it. So this has been my review of The Stand. Let me know what you think about it. There's also a TV series adaptation coming out of this probably next year. It's being filmed at the moment, I think, and they've already released a lot of the cast. Cannot wait for that. It's just perfect timing because they hadn't really announced it while I was reading it, but by the time I'd finished it, it was announced. So I think it's a 10-part series, so if you've come here from hearing about the TV series, I would recommend reading the book first. But otherwise, yeah, this has been my review. Let me know your comments about The Stand in the comment section below. Have you seen the 90s version? How does this stack up? I've not watched that for such a long time, I don't really remember it, but obviously it's not going to be as good as this conglomerate of a book. So thank you all for watching. Let me know your thoughts down below, and I will see you with another Stephen King review, hopefully within the next couple of months. The next one I will be reading is the Bachman books. I'm not sure if I'm going to read them all at once or if I'm just going to read the ones in published order first. So I think the next one is The Long Mile, is it? And that one's supposed to be really good. So that's going to be my next Stephen King review. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.